Nemo.
Hey, Lila. Good morning, Lila. Good evening, Lila.
It's afternoon here.
Good afternoon,
We're on
Lila.
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, so I think there might be some more people, but I'm not sure. We'll see.
I'm just coming.
Hello, Martin.
Martin's eating too. Everyone's eating.
You're
Hey,
all
Martin.
eating. Yeah.
Grazing.
My wife is bringing me some food in a moment, so.
Martin's very foggy.
Yeah, it's foggy in the dark.
Yeah, curiously, we have a beautiful fog here in the morning here in Washington.
Okay. It's kind of rare here that it's foggy. I live up on a hill. Right now it's sunshiny.
Do you ever get to look down on the fog and look like you're in the heavens?
Well, I'm not really where I have a look over a view over the valley, but it's really cool when that happens. Yeah, if I could choose where to live, I would live on sort of on top of a hill where I can look over a valley with lights and some fog sometimes. Yeah.
Actually, just behind me in my backyard, I have a 300-foot drop to the water. So every day I'm looking at the water, and on rare occasions, the cloud cover on the water is low enough that it looks like I'm above the clouds and I can't see the water, and that's really cool.
Wow, that's nice. Cool. Anyway, let's get started. So, hello, Martin. You hear us all right?
I hear you good. Amazingly.
Yeah.
Hey, Martin.
We hear you good too. Okay,
Hey, Martin, out of curiosity, what time zone?
Tim?
Whoops.
Sorry. Hey, Martin, I was just curious what time zone you're in.
I think the same as Fleming, Central Europe.
Okay, great.
Same as Italy or Vienna.
Good.
How about you, Sam?
I'm same as West Coast, left coast, USA.
Good grief. The antipodes almost.
And hello to Simon and Letitia. Haven't seen any of you for a while, so hello.
Hey,
Good
Simon.
morning.
So are you in China, Simon?
No, I'm in Caledon, Ontario.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Nearly
Waiting for things to happen. In a few weeks, I should be back in China.
All right. Well, cool. And hi, Letitia.
Hey, Letitia.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
We're good, I think.
Oh, belated happy birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
You look a year older.
No, I don't. I look pretty much the same. But thank you for noticing anyway.
Maybe it's because I haven't seen you for so long.
Yeah. Well, you don't look a day older than you are.
You're so astute. Thank you.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Running to grab a water.
Okay. All right. So, well, we can start getting started. So last time we talked about death, which was meant to be a difficult topic, and maybe it was. And the idea now is to sort of go maybe a little deeper, a little more personal. So somebody suggested personal grief. Doesn't have to be about death, but it might be whatever it takes to go a little deeper with that. So I don't know where that is going to go. I think we might also have scared off some people last time. I'm not totally sure. Sophie didn't seem thrilled about getting into personal feelings like that, so I don't know if we get to go further with that at some point. Anyway, we're here. So, don't know how we get started. Like, I can start personally. I don't necessarily have access to a lot of personal grief, and in some fashion, I'm not even very sure what it is. Like, there's been times in my life where I felt particularly hit or particularly sad about, for example, somebody who died. Mostly I don't. Mostly I get over it quite easily. But sometimes it hit me harder than others. So to give an example of somebody I got particularly sad about, if Heiner was here, he knows, or he knew Nicholas Albery. Nicholas Albery he founded, what was it called? The Global Ideas Bank, which was a non-profit organization that collected good ideas for social change, and every year it published some books with the best ideas. And I made a website for it where people could put in ideas and vote for them. And Nicholas was also the founder of the Natural Death Center, I think it was called, which was about woodland burials and things like that. I forgot where he lived in the UK, but at some point he was killed in a car accident, which I mean, it's not the first time I've lost somebody who suddenly died, but I was somehow struck by how that particularly hit me harder than anybody, harder than even my dad dying, for example. Part it was sudden, in part we still had something going on. I had unanswered emails from him. We were still working on some things. It was sort of brutal and sudden. So there I have an experience of having grief I didn't really know what to do with. It struck me, and it took sort of weeks to get over that. But otherwise, I must admit I'm sort of fairly griefless, even if people close to me die. So I might be either suppressing things, or I don't know what it is, or I just don't have very many feelings like that. I'm not totally sure, but certainly there was a point where I felt unexpected grief, and where there actually was something to process. Anyway, that's a little thing from me.
I'd like to comment here, if I may. If I look at my own life, when I feel grief, it's invariably that there was an unfinished communication. I needed to hear something from somebody or say something to somebody, and damn it and blast, they up and died. So I could never complete the conversation except in my imagination. And that seemed to me to be a huge part of grief.
I think it sort of fits for me, whether it's somebody where I have something not finished with.
Yeah, like the friend that you just mentioned. You were working together and suddenly he's not there. So there's unfinished business that can never be finished in the way that you would prefer.
Yeah. Yeah, you might well be right. Like there, it was for me more about that, the sort of interruption of something, rather than it was that we were very close. We hadn't even met in person, which was one of the things that was unfinished, maybe. Whereas, as I said, with my own dad, wasn't anything particularly unfinished. It was sort of okay, and he died, and well, okay.
A personal experience of grief came last week. I had bought a very beautiful chicken, a young Faverel, and was giving it special attention. And suddenly a hawk had taken it. And to my surprise and almost shock, I was overcome with grief. I could even tear up with it if I dwell on it. And we lose a lot of chickens to hawks, unfortunately.
So what, do you have any idea what that represented for you? I mean, do you have unfinished business with a chicken, or does it somehow
It
connect
sounds
with any?
ridiculous, doesn't it?
I don't
And
know.
it felt ridiculous to me, and I was totally overcome by the only name I can give it is grief.
I resonate with these feelings. I had a bunny that died, and we had the rotating pictures, the electronic picture frame, and every once in a while the bunny one would go by, and I'd almost burst into tears. I don't even think I ever felt like that with my parents. And I don't know, maybe it's displaced, or one thing is in denial and the other thing has come to represent it. I don't know. But I always did think it's weird.
Yeah, I imagine it's some kind of substitution going on, Cheryl, and I tried to wonder what that little chicken reminded me of, but I didn't find any answer. But I work a lot with other people who are suffering grief following a death or bereavement or even a separation. And we can sort that out pretty quick, usually by finding the root of grief in your own life, which normally goes back to childhood.
I have a little story to tell about youth. From the age of about 7 years old, I met this child who lived just down the road, and by coincidence, I was playing my little accordion and walking around, and the parents invited me in. This child had one of those very rare diseases. He was all blue. He was much smaller than his age. He was 2 years older than me. And we all knew that he was going to die. He wasn't going to live very long. At the most, we were expecting 16, 17 years old. So I made friends with him, and I spent, I would say, a good part of my youth at his home, playing with him. His name was Benedetto, which means blessed. And in some ways, I feel that I've been blessed to have known him because of the time that I spent with him, and treat him just like any other human being. We played the games that he could play because he didn't have very much strength. He collected cars, and he had a sister a little bit younger, so the three of us would just spend time together. And this went on until I was about 13 or 14. That's when I was called, and I was told that he passed away. And I don't feel the grief. I feel more like I've been blessed by that experience, because it took me to a new level right from the start. My mother died within a few months after that. I was 14. And I felt that she went to heaven, and she was now an angel hovering not very high, and maybe 100 meters, and taking care of things and just looking over me as I progressed in life. And that's definitely changed my perspective of death, and how I look at death, and how I look at living. And after that, I got into psychology. But I was 16. So I'll leave it at that.
I wanted to be in on this particular conversation. I'm already emotional. because I feel like I'm in it, in the experience of allowing the grief to express. And for me, this very human experience is a place of acknowledging a loss of something that was potent and vital and part of the fabric of my life, that held a container for me to explore and be myself. And for me, usually a particular moment in time, a death of a loved one, a loss, maybe a job or a pet, activates this real visceral bodily experience of every sensation just leaping, keening from my toes to the top of my head, a release of an energy that had been entwined in my life. And sometimes the experience is so radical, so primordial, that I just sink into this place of all the deaths unacknowledged, all the sadness, all the loss of potential lives that could have been lived to their fullest. And then I grieve the entire expression of humanity that I feel like I'm transforming in a way to allow for the world to expand its heart. Sometimes the grief will take me to my knees, and I can't do anything except be in this place of aloneness and separation and exploration of who am I really in this place of loss. But there's a part of me that holds this space, that knows that this experience is part of this vital health that needs to happen, a complete release, so that in the next phase, after I can stand again, after I can begin again, that I am forever changed in the best way possible, in a larger sense, in a more dynamic way. And that I can be an empathetic resonator that allows people to feel fully. Because to me, the extent that we can allow ourselves in any one moment, even if just for seconds at a time, the deep, deep awareness of the effect of the loss of something that we love deeply, that we can love even more extensively and more connectedly, and feel this abundant life force energy that is cyclical in nature. After the equinox, I always feel the descent with the energy in my hemisphere waning, and I feel pulled into this place of nothingness, and that fear of me being nothing without the things that I've lost, and being able to stay in that discomfort has been my practice. Knowing that time and space will shift again, and that I will shift again, and that I live to be able to extend whatever goodness that the love I shared with a being or an experience or a pet can be continued to physically be felt in the world, because what is remembered for me continues to live.
Thank you, Letitia, for taking us all into our hearts. I realize that I'm holding a sort of background grief all the time. And it's a grief for the human world, I guess, or an ideal of the human world that I hold. And it extends into the physical world as well. At this time when it seems like so much is coming to an end, is breaking down, is dying, there's a grief for the world itself, I think, and the world that humans experience. And it's a kind of, it's just a deep frustration with our own ignorance and stupidity, I think, as well. And I have this incredible experience of the beauty of the world in my day-to-day life, and the beauty of people, animals, everything really. And I see how simple life actually is and can be, and how healthy it can be. And yet we seem to be locked in to some kind of greater destructive cycle. And that mismatch between what's actually going on and this kind of ideal and this direct experience of beauty I have of the world day to day creates what I would call grief in me, and it's there all the time. And I forget it. I have moments of joy and pleasure, of course, but it's there. It's kind of a foundation of my experience. And I think it's heightened in particular because I have 2 children, and I feel like they're born into a culture and a time of decline and ending. And I have a sort of grief for the life that they might have had. And there's a rational part of me that kind of knows that everything is as it should be as well. But I feel, despite that, in my heart, a kind of sadness for the passing of things. But it could also just be that that's the passing of my own life, because we're all grieving, I think, for ourselves, because we live and then we inevitably die. And it almost seems like just as I realize how amazing and wonderful life actually is, I also realize how terminal and short my own life is, regardless of any environmental conditions.
Something I would like to ask the group, if anybody would like to comment, is how close is grief to guilt? If I think of relationships where friends or relatives have died, if I was absolutely guilt-free, then there wouldn't be any grief. But if I was feeling guilty or I didn't go visit that person for 2 years, then there might be grief. And this could be a reflection of my earlier comment that grief indicates unfinished business.
I can relate to that. I might have felt guilty because I chose to have that rabbit have surgery because it had a cancer. And so then it was declining. And then I put it to sleep intentionally because I didn't want it to suffer because the thing burst open and I knew it was going to be bad. So I think I had guilt over that, and that would be unfinished business because, the bunny didn't recover and then all was well, And I feel like I didn't cry too much over my parents because on what Tim touched on, that grief is loss also. It's, just that big sense of loss. And I feel like that for me is an equal grief in my life. Are some deep losses that didn't have to do with death. And some of that was with my parents. And so I felt like the crying was done because it had been cried all out so many times all through the years that it was just like, I don't know, it was pre-grieved because that would be a loss. And even if you don't have a parenting situation that was as good as it could have been, then you would grieve that loss. I mean, I did, but now I have more perspective as I've aged, and I've realized that everyone does the best they can, and I just got past it. I just had total compassion for their situation, and maybe it's like childbirth. I forget my grief when it's gone, when it's past. If it happened again, it'd probably really suck.
And by the way, you may have noticed me grinning a lot in the last couple of minutes, but a box of consumer electronics just arrived from Canada, and I'm really pleased to see them. Sorry that it interacted with your bunny.
I would like to respond to that. To me, they're very distinct emotions. I have experienced guilt, but the focus is always on me. Something about me, something that I've done, something that has to reference my not enoughness, that I didn't show up enough. That's guilt. Grief, for me, can be related to that, but grief to me is thinking or experiencing the loss of another. It's the relatedness that I have as a connection to another, and that my experience of that loss puts me at the center, but the focus of my attention is not all about me, if that makes any sense.
What I'm getting is like, again, I can see also the guilt connection, but I don't think that's the main thing. And earlier when Letitia was speaking, I was sort of resonating with that or trying to work out, well, what's the closest thing I can get to grief? And in a sense, it's sort of that all the life not lived. It's like it doesn't even have anything directly to do with somebody's gone or dead. You might as well grieve in the middle of life because there's all this wasted life or what we didn't pay attention to. The love we didn't express, what we didn't notice, what we didn't fully live. And probably in most of our lives, however clever or awake we are, we probably spend half of it sort of half sleepwalking through it and not really getting it. And just realizing that, for me, gets close to a grief kind of thing, like realizing that both with myself and with others, all the wonderful things we just don't pay attention to or skip by or deny or reject and so forth. And I've experienced a few times in my life that wasn't exactly grief, but it was a little bit similar, where it feels like every 10 years or so, I suddenly, in a sense, wake up and realize, wow, I wasn't really paying any attention when was the last time I felt like this? 10 years ago or something. And it's not a particularly pleasant moment. It's not a wow, isn't like wonderful. It's more like, it's kind of like a loss or a grief that I didn't really experience it. I wasn't really present with everything that happened. And that makes me feel sort of grief about the waste of it. And I have mixed feelings about it. And it's very easy to go back to just sort of not really paying attention to it. There are different degrees of it, even though I feel I pay fairly well attention to life, that this makes me realize that I'm not, there's certainly limits to that. I'm not doing that all that fully. That's lots of fullness of life I'm just sort of skipping by and not paying any attention to. And so there can be a lot of grief just in realizing that, even if we're still here and nobody died. It's kind of sad that we weren't really living as fully as we could.
I understand that totally. I think that's my grief in a nutshell. What could have been, what might have been. Just the way you put it.
And of course, if somebody dies, then it's sort of too late. So if they haven't died, we might optimistically think, oh, we'll get around to that. But then we get caught unprepared when somebody dies, because then you can no longer sort of pretend you'll catch up later, because you probably won't.
I have the idea that death doesn't have that much to do with it, Fleming. If somebody steps out of your life and emigrates or goes with another lover or partner, they're gone. And I do believe that you're right in saying that we can mourn the loss. Death is simply one of those ways that people leave us, I think.
It's kind of an abstract thing, like that we put so much importance in the death. Like, as you're saying, I might actually not feel sad or notice anything with somebody just moving on or going away or moving on with their life. But if they then die 20 years later, even though I didn't talk with them, that might suddenly bring something up, because now it's too late to do what I wouldn't have done anyway. It's a little bit phony. But well. But you're right. It doesn't have anything to do with the death.
It could be the emotional bond or connection that you have with that person, the emotional closeness. If I'm not very close to somebody and they go away or even die, okay, stuff happens. If I am very close to somebody or something and they go away or die, it can hit me much, much harder. So it's the amount of closeness that seems to be a key factor in what we call grief.
Yeah, it's a physical thing. It's how much that person is in your body. The more you're affected by a death, I would think that you would feel more in your body, you know. And if somebody is very, what you're calling closeness, I would say, is a kind of physical entanglement with another person, where you somehow carry them physically as a sort of pattern of sensations within your body. Yeah.
I'm sure you're right there, Tim. When Leticia was talking, I was astonished how many times I have heard a similar story with similar sadness and similar sobs. That usually means that a living person is carrying a dead person practically in their body. I wouldn't say possessed, that's too medieval, I would say identified. And so when I see symptoms like that, I have a pretty darn good idea what to do if the person wants to do anything. And many people seem to treasure their grief and tell the world about it. They use their grief as a way to say, look how empathic or compassionate or sympathetic I am to this person who's left. I don't know if that even makes any sense. Simon, I know you understand.
It made sense. I would take it in the other direction with, although I can understand what you said, I felt a bit of sort of, I don't know, jealousy or an urge to be able to feel somebody or remember somebody, experience somebody so deeply. And so then in a sense, I got the grief about, well, I'm not particularly able to do that. Or sort of like somebody dies, I'll just move on very quickly. I'm not going to take the time to very deeply experience and celebrate their life and what now is lost. I get over things very quickly, but in a sense, I feel a little bad about that. I mean, in a sense, it would be very wonderful if we all could feel as celebrated and as noticed and as welcomed. It doesn't mean we have to suffer in it, but I would personally like all of us to feel that we've really, really been noticed. That doesn't necessarily mean grief or feeling bad, but if we all really could feel that somebody really noticed we were here, I think that's a very good thing. And I feel a little maybe ashamed or a little grief even about not doing that. I'm not saying I should, but I can see the sort of good side in sort of celebrating somebody by grieving them deeply. So that it's another side of it.
I would
make me laugh. You're saying you feel bad that you don't feel bad enough. I'm sorry, Leticia.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah, but let Leticia speak.
I think for me, it isn't the loss of an individual, not a death. I'm not grieving death, a death of a human, a person, in this experience that I'm having right now. I am in a place in my life that there's so much space. I was reading, and the thing, I'm reading a book, and the description of the space that I feel I am in is a place where all things are present. And particularly in Western culture, there aren't rituals or even acceptable social ways of expressing grief. When people are sad, that's one thing. Most people just don't want to be around them. When people are experiencing deep grief, heart-wrenching, feeling like you've just been shattered, that your ego has been split apart in a way that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, but the fact that your sense of identity has been shifted, that something remarkable happened, and then the attachment to identify it, to language it, on the spectrum of joy to sadness, it's not about experiencing the joy, but it's about recognizing this cyclical nature of peaks and valleys, of expressing this, the vitality of what it means to have a full complement of human emotions. And exploring that has been my question, because I was raised in a culture that was very different. And so one of the key elements in the culture that I come from is what is culturally appropriate, what is socially appropriate or socially acceptable. And where is it socially acceptable to have these, to be able to express this sense of loss or feeling lost or not knowing or being undone. So to me, this feeling of grief is one that, you know, in ancient times, you can see the history of funerals, and you can see that they hired keeners. They hired people who would just weep like the whole world was coming apart, because the culture around them didn't have the capacity to express this deep human emotion. And I think, this is just my theory, that in order for me as a human to have the full capacity to do the service in the world that I need to be doing right now, I want to be able to weather the intensity of emotions on all ends of the spectrum, and to be able to stay in a place of peace with it. And the only way I can do that is to allow myself to have it, so that I can understand that there isn't a death, that it doesn't need to be fixed, that like anything else, it will shift if it's held and appreciated and given a life of its own, but guided, because our culture doesn't have appropriate mechanisms, that people will fall into this well of grief and then be diagnosed as depressed or having a midlife crisis or whatever people want to label it, instead of just recognizing it as a way that we as humans experience moving on as part of that process of fully moving on, of recognizing that deep connectivity. I really appreciate that, Martin, of how you express this connection that we have. And that's the way I experience grief, that in this connection is shattered in a physical way because they're no longer physically here. My job is no longer mine. The identity that I had that created the sense of the I that is me is no longer me. So who am I now without that? That's the space that grief will put me in, to be able to reweave this fabric of my life with the textures of the beauty that was left in the wake of that loss.
Letitia, that sounds like the goal of many meditative disciplines, to reach that lack of identification with your own life. And for many people, it's freedom. And yet the exact same experience for other people might be called insanity, and they would seek a lunatic asylum. Again, it comes to what is culturally appropriate. I was thinking a few minutes ago that Jewish people seem to have to tear some article of clothing as a way of showing publicly that they grieve the loss of somebody. Here in Central Europe, there's a wonderful event. I call it the Day of the Dead, All Saints' Day, Walpurgis Night. It's degenerated into Halloween in America, but All Saints' Day is a major family holiday here. Simon, why do I see you so clearly?
And why don't I see you very clearly? Your light is shining behind your head rather than in front of your face.
There we go.
A little bit better. Can I add something which hopefully it's not too psychologically philosophical, but I see Letitia at a higher stage of development. And what Martin is talking about is more for the sort of lower stage of understanding life. So from Martin's point of view, most of humanity is at the level of understanding guilt, grief, and everything else, more of a superficial, mundane level. Whereas Letitia is superseded that. She's gone beyond and now reaching for the new understanding of ego, the new understanding of who am I, and disidentifying with their persona. So I don't know if you are understanding what I'm trying to say. We can talk about grief, but we have to understand where we're coming from. Where am I coming from when I talk about grief? What is my understanding of life in general? What is my bigger picture of humanity? And then you attach grief to that. But at each stage of development, it's different. Maybe Martin, you can mention Claire Graves' stages and sort of do more of a leverage of trying to see how we can communicate. Because, the language changes as we move up stages of growth, development, personal.
Well, it's also that emotions can sort of serve different functions. Like for some people, it becomes something that's sort of stuck. Like grief can be for somebody, something happened and you have grief, and then that grief gets sort of encapsulated and stuck and stays there for a long time and causes you a lot of suffering, and it's difficult to get out of it, and you would need some kind of help to get over it, kind of thing. It doesn't serve you. But from another sense, the emotion can be a way of fully experiencing it, of working it through, of processing what's going on, which is what I experienced Letitia is talking about, is to really be present with it fully. That doesn't mean you have a problem and somebody needs to sort of help you to not feel grief. It's a way of, in a certain sense, enjoying it, or rather fully living it. And in that sense, it's emotion more as a tool, or though that's too cold a way of putting it, it's a way of experiencing what is there, whatever the emotion is, to not shy away from dealing with whatever it is, and then it naturally will flow and transform into something else. So it's an entirely different thing from the situation where you're stuck with some grief you can't get over, kind of thing.
I also think that in my own personal cases of grief, a lot of my suffering, and I have no problem wallowing in it. It's like I just really feel it. But I do think that a lot of the suffering that went on a long time because it was a person who was entangled with me very deeply was my hormonal state at the time. I think that I was young, I was very hormonal, I had 2 little kids. There was that stress, the stress wears down your hormones that keep you happy. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And it can really be kind of a false mood. Or if I had been under healthier conditions with my hormones, perhaps I would not have felt it so deeply and stayed up for 6 months mopping floors and crying. I might have, you know what I mean? So I think that it's very complex, and it has biological, philosophical, psychological, all kinds of aspects, cultural.
Martin asked the question earlier about the connection between grief and guilt and death. I've never seen anyone actually experience grief quite as much as my current girlfriend. Her mother died when she was 12. And her family that was held together by her mother essentially exploded. They all went their different ways, and she is essentially without family. Compounded in that was that her father visited her every night from 8 to about 12. And she was very, very traumatized by all of that. She ended up using heroin and is now in treatment with methadone. And the current clinic that she's in has accused her of tampering with some of the urinalysis tests. And, I don't believe that she has ever done that. But because of this alleged allegation, which is unproven, they're kicking her off her clinic. And I don't know if any of you know what this kind of treatment does to people, but the way they're going to treat her essentially is going to put her into a suicidal depression. And I feel that there's nothing I can do about that. I've tried talking to her clinic, and her clinic is actually trying to make it so that other clinics in the area will not take her. And she's tried to get off this treatment for 2 or 3 times before in the last dozen years. And every time it's brought her to suicide attempts. And so if and when something does happen with her clinic, I feel that there's a high likelihood she is actually going to die, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so there's some anticipated guilt because I don't know what to do about helping her. And this is just unconscionable that a clinic would actually treat her that way. But evidently, this is not uncommon in this subculture. And I'm learning more and more than I ever wanted to know about it. So there's living with this dread, this anticipation that something bad is going to happen. And I really don't know what to do about it. And yet I don't see any way to avoid it. So yes, there is going to be a lot of guilt when that, or if that actually happens.
Guilt for you, Sam? I mean, you will feel guilty that you did something or by omission.
Yes, that I wasn't able to do enough. I can never do enough to try and get her over this hump. And when she gets into these fits and depressions and whatever, it's impossible really for anyone else to be around. She gets violent. She damages things. She damages herself. She tries to throw herself out of moving cars on the freeway. It's just horrible when it happens. And I've got a daughter here and I've got a father here, and I don't want them around that. So yes, I do anticipate feeling that I will not do enough and that she is actually in a situation where she's going to be compelled to end her life because of the way the clinic is treating her.
I'm going to send you a couple things, Sam, after this conversation.
Thanks for listening.
I feel, Sam, what I want to say is that the intention is a rope, could be a rope to escape the grief, the goodness, the willingness, the maximum efforts that can be provided. The intention, I think, could be key. Even if surely it can be well understood it's not enough.
The guilt even takes many forms. Because I know that she's got no family, and her situation makes it difficult for her to have friends. And so sometimes she feels that I am helping her out of pity, and she doesn't want that.
Is she right, Sam?
Sometimes she is, because I do feel at times I cannot live with this, I cannot deal with it, but I don't ever abandon her because I know she has no one else. So, when she's good, times are good, but that now happens like 1 out of every 30 or 1 out of every 60 days.
Did you choose this relationship for these reasons, do you think, maybe?
No, when I first got to know her, she presented, I saw all the aspects of her that excited me. She had a degree in molecular biology. She's brilliant. She's smart. She's happy. She's engaging. She's, in my understanding, she's quite beautiful, stunningly beautiful. But she carries all the sadness and grief because of the way she's been treated by her family and the loss of her mother at 12. And that caused a number of unfortunate decisions regarding substance abuse, which then got her into treatment, which then got her, into limited options. She was not able to use her molecular biology degree. So, yeah, all this unfolded over time. And obviously, it's not what I want when I first met her, but I don't feel like in a society where I want people to have good relationships and good connections, I don't believe in abandonment. So I don't want to abandon her because she's got no other help. So yes, in that sense, Martin, there is a yes there.
I imagine sort of there's one way of dealing with a sort of impossible situation or difficult situation. It's that there's a way forward simply by sort of experiencing or feeling what the experience is, which is if it's grief or we put another name on it, or feeling guilty, whatever it is, but like simply being with it, like somehow finding a way of, we could say constructively, but it's really just being present with it without converting it into being wrong or really being guilty. Just the experience itself can be healthy, like the emotions of being helpless and not it being complex and there's nothing really one can do to fix it. But I imagine that in a certain sense has a magical transformative power, that if one can really be present with it, it can better flow. And to avoid the temptation to sort of fall into it becoming sort of a permanent, it's my fault, or I should have done something, or there's a million ways we can turn it into sort of a mental condemnation of ourselves or of somebody else that doesn't move. But if we can sort of be with the emotions, I feel and imagine it goes somewhere. It's still not necessarily pretty. One might not know where, and it might not even end up being particularly pretty, but it sort of flows. At least that's what I imagine and believe and also have experienced to a certain degree in my own life.
To the extent that I understand that, I think I'm trying to do that. But to the extent that I say I could have done something else, it is true. There's always more I can do. But I always feel that the more I do, the more I put my daughter and my father into this. And that's something that I haven't chosen to do right now.
It does feel to me like you are doing what I said, which is just sort of honestly expressing where you're at with it. I mean, you are not presenting us here with a problem to solve or some kind of a therapy thing where we need to fix you somehow, but just sort of honestly expressing a difficult situation, like Harry did that the last time. It doesn't mean we have a fix for it or there's something we can say that suddenly makes it all good. I mean, some things in life are not all good. Somebody is going to die, or all the options are not perfect, but so sometimes the best we can do is to be honest with it or express it or be present with it, be present for somebody else with it, and that's right now okay. And to avoid the temptation of making it something quick and pretty, which it is not going to be.
Let me put my lessons beside it, that one that I'm learning. What I have to learn now is to bow for the destiny of the other. And there's nothing I can do to help. I can be with it. I can send my love, but I cannot change what the other decides. We are free. We are all free. Even when you're helplessness, you cannot help the helpless. I can't. And I'm experiencing that this is a sign of respect and acceptance. It is how it is.
And I would just like to add, it is what it is in this moment. That isn't to say that life might create additional potential and possibilities in any other moment, but to be very aware and open to what is happening in you. And this is the nature of what it means to be an adult. It means to be responsible and be held accountable for each of our decisions and the relationships that are fully in our lives. And sometimes it's difficult choices we have to make about how we balance those relationships. But we're not getting any younger. And if we don't continue to create a culture of wisdom where a person like Sam's girlfriend might have in her community been noticed and helped in her youth. And so the more that we allow ourselves to be fully aware to what is needed and the service that we can provide at whatever degree or level, even if the only thing that I can do with Sam in this moment is to hold an intention that a possibility will open, because I don't know all the factors. I only know that life is full of incredible possibilities. And I do believe in miracles. So I'm holding that space. I'm holding it so that it's not fixed, that this is the nature of what destiny has in store for us. I believe that we create and co-create those things. So I want to thank you, Sam, for your honesty and for revealing and being open to sharing that with us.
In the same way, I would like to thank everybody for your comments today. I've been very pleased to hear them, even if I didn't have any clever answers for them.
I think you did have some clever answers, Martin. And anyway, I think we've moved on to, this is sort of the beginning to be the end of the meeting, so we can move on sort of summarizing what we got out of this, how this worked. What do you think about this meeting here?
For me, Fleming, the insight of the relationship between guilt and grief all by itself was worth being here for. I'm very pleased. I'll be happy to research that and see where it goes.
Cool.
I would like to say that after not having been involved for weeks with this topic being so intimate, I feel the experiment for me was profound, and I really deeply appreciate the attention and the commitment to each of you who came to be here with honesty and openness, and I can't thank you enough, and I really appreciate participating. So I think it was an awesome experiment.
Thank you, Letizia.
Anybody else?
Well, I do want to thank people for listening because, Martin, I think, you're touching on this whole issue of guilt is partly why I find myself telling this story. Because in some way, it's a way of me saying, I'm trying to do what I can. And yet I don't feel like I can do enough.
It will be hell for you, Sam, if later in your life you will think of something you could have done and it's too late. And we all do the best that we know how to do.
Any other finishing remarks, meta comments on this meeting?
I feel this meeting has been a circular one, or it has kind of completed a whole circle compared to the meeting I felt last week, where I was very much in a position where I wanted to leave that circle open. And I felt today that the circle has done a whole. So I'm grateful.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm sad I missed most of it, but the part that I got was indeed worth the while. Thank you. And good to feel and sense the trust and intimacy that is between people who have never met in real life. This is so good.
I think you've met us all in real life. This is as real as it gets for me these days. I do most of my work by Skype, so this is quite real for me, Harry.
All right. Well, I was happy with this meeting too. I really enjoy the intimacy and going deeper and learning some things. I like the way we're exploring something, and there's some little lessons, or sometimes it's just being with something, but somehow it leaves us a little bit richer somehow. So anyway,
thank you very much, Fleming.
Well, thank you for coming. I think I don't have time for a planning meeting, but I think I'm just going to continue suggesting some difficult topics, if it's okay with you, meaning things that require a bit of, I don't know, guts or difficulty getting into, but that might be useful to be able to talk about. So, okay, so otherwise I'd like to thank all of you for coming, being here, being present, participating in each your way. It has been lovely. So thank you all of you, and see you again another time.
Okay, goodbye, good night,
Bye.
good morning.
Everyone.
Bye, Lila. Bye, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Goodbye.
Hello. Goodbye.